Ik denk dat we best niets publiceren.
The archive as a tool for artistic research. An introduction. Els de Bruyn. Since 2003, within the context of the Bologna Decree, research became, next to education and the development of the arts, an official task for the art schools in Flanders. Before this Bologna Decree, only universities were funded for the academic research done by their professors and researchers. But now, also research done by artists was recognized and, not of minor importance, financed by the government. This led to the possibility for teachers and artists affiliated with the art schools to apply for funded research, which originates from their artistic practices. The term research in the arts was introduced to stress the difference with scientific research. Research became a buzzword and a hot item in the art scene, not only in higher art education. Exhibitions and artists' publications were announced as research-based, and the artist became the artist researcher. Although this felt new and to some extent overwhelming or even threatening, it was actually building on earlier tendencies in the arts. Neo-conceptualism, a process-based and reflective attitude, which was already bon ton in contemporary visual arts and found its roots in the 60s and 70s, was revived and matched seamlessly with the often implicit, unspoken expectations that came up when research got introduced in the art schools. At the very beginning of this process, more than 10 years ago, in 2009, the research group Archivolt was founded at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts Antwerp, mainly as a think tank and a research platform centered around the notion of the archive and the practice of archiving. Its central objective is to activate archives. Archives do not only encourage discourse and reflection, but also generate action and creation which are crucial to both academic and artistic practices. Archivolt is not only working with physical archives or artists, but offers possibilities to perform the archive and hereby establish new collaborations in between artists and academics of many sorts. In this book, a multitude of research projects and their related archives get unraveled, made public, and activated. 16 artist researchers were interviewed on their practice by Thomas Crombie and invited to make a contribution to this publication based on their research work with archives in relation to their own artistic practice. If this book demonstrates one thing on a meta level, it is the raison d'être of artistic research. Meanwhile, less controversial than 10 years ago, at least in Flanders. The variety of research proposals demonstrated here is so rich in inspirations, approaches, strategies, contexts, references and critical thoughts that it is, in our modest view, an enrichment to the purely academic way to cope with archives and archival research.
Heide Hinrichs works with institutional archives and sees the role of the artist as one to circumvent and question the barriers that are often unconsciously inherent to such archives. Often, she has experienced archives as being difficult to access and highly protected from the public domain. As an artist, she negotiates with the institution to open up archives, which becomes a learning process for all parties involved. Other artists work with their personal archives.
Ines Cox decided not to kill, but to archive her darlings during design processes. They became different personalities with whom she created again and again new designs and graphics. This archive of her darlings became an indispensable working tool for her new creations.
Adriana Gvrdonovic works with her own archives, which consist of exhibitions, takeaway materials, press releases, invitation cards, leaflets, etc., that she collected over the years. Based on these documents, which she sees as her learning materials and references, she created the Archive of Artistic Anxieties. She uses material of the first archive to enrich inspire and question situations and conditions that are part of the second archive.
Vijay Maya Pachinelam worked amongst other archives with the photographic archive of his father. This specific archive that was not his own raised questions on how to deal with authorship when editing and publishing it, hereby taking the role of the artistic editor. He also elaborates on his research in the archives of Plano B, an illegal record shop annex live music club bar performance venue annex tattoo shop in Rio de Janeiro. After a few years, Plano B became a kind of global reference for experimental music and performance art. After its closure, it left behind an impressive archive of sound recordings. Through his contributions, he gives voice to Fernando Torres, one of the initiators of the project space, to provide context to the archive and formulate his visions and memories. During this archival research, questions and appropriation and ethics became central points of attention, reflection and action. Similar themes popped up in the research of Alexis Gauthier.
His research approach to the notion of the archive is rather irregular, non-structured as well as playful. It is an intuitive, if not chaotic, exploration of the archive, which has to do with chance operations and curious coincidences. He sees the archive as a transmission zone. When you archive something, he states, you archive it in respect of someone else, even if it is only for your own future self. The archive is always being directed to someone, to an audience. You could see the archive as a message in time, maybe as a letter to ourselves.
Els Dietvorst is also archiving in a less structured way the things that cross her path. Often in a very literal way. If you walk the same road every day, the road is different every day. It is the same with art, she says. Everything changes. That is why she gives the archive an active meaning, a living archive that people can use and work with, and with a focus on its process. We have to let go of the idea that art is something which you can hold on to and keep for years, she concludes.
Or, as Erik Tielemans notices, maybe something is already an archive if you look at it as an archive. In his contribution to this book, the following sentence struck me. I think if it is not being used, read, or looked at, it is just stuff on a shelf, pointing to the need for an archive to be activated. If not, it becomes useless or meaningless.
Ersi Varveri and Gijs Waterschool conceived the materials that they found in their house, and which were left by others who lived there before, as an archive and a memory of that place, and use it to start with self-publishing as an archival strategy. And, as Gijs scribbles on his drawings, the archive can be a space that could be used in different forms to regenerate our way of thinking and acting. But also the figs of trees next to their house in Syros were stored as an archive by making marmalade of them. It is about how you look at things, how things move you or make you act.
Valentin Kempink works with archives in a very personal way. For her, there are two ways of archiving. There is an archiving as a consequence of an action, and there is an archiving that is situated in the action itself, and does not come afterwards. She elaborates on this in her contribution of drawings.
Bence Rohansky approaches the archive certainly in a very different way. He puts his role as a conceptual artist aside when he searches for traces of graffiti. He becomes a very punctual, almost detective-like visitor of archives and libraries to search in local newspapers from the 60s till the present to look for backgrounds in photographs that could show some traces of graffiti or street art. At the same time, he makes many inventories of today's graffiti by personally photographing these very ephemeral images on trains and city walls, and hereby creating an archive that preserves urban information for future generations.
In a similar way, David Vermeire and Johan Pas, both art historians, worked closely together with artist Guillaume Bell to publish an inventory of all the multiples he ever made. Bringing together and describing all these works of art makes a new archive. in the form of a book and an exhibition. Are the archives of artists becoming more relevant than their actual works?
Nico Dox states that artists should not have the role of constantly producing new objects. Artists could instead also bring existing works into other relations and dialogues with one another. In this way, artists also create new works. He says it is our social responsibility as artists today to think and act on the basis of sustainability. A great deal of art objects are created, sold and stored in all kinds of collections and archives. Only a very small part of them are publicly accessible. All the rest is kept in cellars and depots, only to gather dust and cobwebs. He thinks we have reached a point today where we need to rethink collections and archives, and above all, to provide them with some light and oxygen. There is a clear overlap with the themes that pop up in the research of Idris Sevenans and Tomas Beaujean.
They maintain an activist archival practice, reappropriating historical documents, objects and organizations as rough building blocks to construct a better narrative for the past, present and future.
The various research practices presented in this book are at least an attempt to put some archival materials into daylight, to let them breathe and to make them public, to put them into action, to bring life to them, to transfer this material to our 21st century and to make them relevant in our time. Towards the end of this archival publication, you can find an inventory of all research projects within the context of this research group since its very beginning. In this way, the editors want to give you an insight in different archival research practices and strategies by artists, researchers at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts Antwerp, and its potentially for the future of artistic research.
Archivoltage, a brief history, a conversation between the authors and the archivists. Forwarded message from Crombie Thomas, thomas.crombie@ap.be. Date 19/12/2020. Subject RE Update Overgangsbudget / Transitional Budget 2020. Dear Archivold researchers, it has been a long time since I last sent you a message about our research and interchange project with the Boston School of the Museum of Fine Arts, called A Visit to the Vegan Archive, exploring an archiving methodology for artistic research. The reason for this is easy to guess, and has probably impacted your life and research as well: the coronavirus crisis. Since traveling to the US will probably be impossible or very difficult the following months, Nico and I have been thinking about an alternative version of the project. In short, we would like to prepare, edit and realize a book in preparation of possible future trips to Boston. In the first part of the book, we aim to document the archiving strategies used by the Archivold researchers. Our tools for surveying their working methods is to conduct extensive interviews. The researchers included in this group include all of you. In the second part, we would like to relate the practice of our researchers to existing strategies in the wider field of the arts. We document their practice through essays, interviews, or artistic contributions by the invited artists. In the third part, we reflect on the concept of the archive as a tool in artistic practice and artistic research. This part is conceived as a reader, which collects various texts, both existing and commissioned essays, regarding archival strategies in contemporary art. We would like to invite each one of you to suggest and contact an artist, theorist, thinker, or other kind of writer who could contribute one of these texts. It's not exactly the project as we started it a few months ago, but the current situation obviously calls for creative solutions. Nico and I have drafted a time schedule and an alternative budget in order to repurpose the project funding. This has also been approved by the research administration at the Academy. You may find it attached to this mail. Be sure to let me know what you think about it. If everything goes according to plan, Nico and I will contact you in the following months to plan the interviews. All the best now. Take care. I hope you are doing well. Thomas en Nico, AP, AP Hogeschool, Antwerpen.
Forwarded message from Erik Tielemans, etiel123@gmail.com. Date 5 January 2020. Subject, RE, Update Overgangsbudget, Transitional Budget 2020. Hey all, many questions, but here's my main one. What is a vegan archive? Cheers, Happy New Year, Erik. Forwarded message from Idris Sevenans, docent Idris Sevenans at antwerpartistsrunschool.com. Date 5 January 2020. Subject, RE, Update Overgangsbudget, Transitional Budget 2020. An archive with appeltjes. Regards, Idris Sevenans, docent, Aars, Antwerp Artists Run School.
In the studio we are now looking at a picture of Idris Sevenans holding a photograph in black and white with a box of apples. Forwarded message from Viai Maya Machinalem, date 03/06/2020. Subject, RE, Update Overgangsbudget / Transitional Budget 2020. Dear Thomas and Nico, hope everything is well. If I understood correctly, the artist fee is for the invited guest artists and not us, the researchers. If that is the case, some of us are no longer employed by the Academy. Having in mind the current situation, it's maybe interesting for those researchers to get paid for their contributions. Regards, VI.
Forwarded message from Idris Sevenans, docent idris.sevenans at antwerpartistsrunschool.com. Date 5 June 2020. Subject, RE, Update Overgangsbudget, Transitional Budget 2020. Dear colleagues, thanks for your messages. I was thinking maybe it is possible to use the whole budget for the printing of the publication itself. I realize it is financially hard in these anti-cultural days, but I think it's stronger to keep the budget as a collective working budget and not give everybody a few €100, which is never enough for any production costs. Maybe only for a few sandwiches with choco. Regards, Idris Sevenans, docent, Aars, Antwerp Artist Run School.
The archive as a tool for artistic research. Some conversations. All interviews with Denis Typhus conducted by Nico Dox from July 2017 until February 2018.
The value of squatting a nipple. Another exchange value. Nico Dox in conversation with Denis Typhus.
Now in the studio we are looking at a photograph of Hannah Poets and Denis Typhus from 2017. The photo was taken by Hannah Poets. Next, we are looking at a photograph of SIC at Squatted Church in Capelle, 1997. The photographer is unknown. Now we are looking at a photograph of Vogelvrijstaat, Squat, 1996, a newspaper clipping. And now we are looking at a photograph called Bonds of Friendship. This is a cover, The Year Unknown. And next we are looking at neutral ST 7-inch 1 Decibel Beaujean from 2017. Now in the studio we are looking at a photograph of Scheldapen, a concert space in Antwerp. The photo is from 1998. The photographer unknown. And next we look at Vol au Vent, a found image. Finally, here in the studio we take a look at an album cover, Club Moral, to all who are interested. This was released by Cthulhu Records, CR09 in Germany, 1989. In much, if not all printed matter, that the artist Typhus produces in his own label Ultra Eczema. He invites, engages, and collaborates with other artists, writers, musicians. His work is about many different things, and one can perhaps even say that UE is a production platform rather than just a regular record label. It is also a communication tool that enriches and enlarges his personal network of friends and collaborations. His artist books speak for themselves as they are simply things he really wants to publish, sometimes in conjunction with events, performances or exhibitions, and sometimes just out of the necessity to share this work with friends. The great diversity of vinyl records that he releases on UE are mostly the product of collaborations in which the audio is created by musicians, artists or performers he invites for a project. As part of his practice, Typhus always designs and makes the artwork for these record sleeves. In most cases, he tries to mix and collage both audio and visual materials. The personal relationship he has with the other artists is the most important aspect in realizing all these collaborations. A lot of the music that UE releases is from Antwerp, as it totally makes sense, as a protest against forgetting, to document and record what is happening or what has happened in this small harbour city. Antwerp is pretty much known for its experimental music, fashion and art. But there is still so much more to discover. UE wants to support, release and communicate both his own practice, as well as other people's practices, and all of this happens because there is an immediate and mutual understanding of each other's work. It is all based on notions of friendship and commoning. Then again, collectivity brings its own difficulties. Sometimes, Typhus has the feeling that collectivity is not feeding his energy, but rather stopping it from taking place. He always has very clear ideas about how and what of making a vinyl record, a book, an installation, a film, a performance, an architectural object. I guess this makes him a difficult, although very interesting and challenging character within any sort of group dynamic. A while ago, as part of our 1-year-long interview, Typhus told me how he visits an exhibition of Assemble at the Architekturzentrum in Vienna. He told me that he was blown away by their work and their ideas, by their collective working attitude. And to quote Typhus, this positive power of many hands joined together. Even though in many cases past experiences have indicated that collectivity is not where Typhus functions at his best, there are a number of artists he has been working with, for many years now. And these collaborations are based on mutual understanding, humor, and especially a love of art. For example, the artist Vaast Colson, with whom he created many Dewey exhibitions and also ran 2 alternative art spaces, Günther and Stadslimiet, for presenting and supporting a huge diversity of contemporary art forms. And at this very moment, Typhus, together with artist Peter Fengler and Vaast Colson and curator Helena Kritis, runs the project space Pinky Bowtie. Besides all this, UE would not exist without the work of David Edren. Websites, sales, and so on. And Jeff Kuipers, layout and computer mania. On the occasion of the Enfant Terrine exhibition at Project Space 1646 in The Hague, Dennis Typhus invited me, Nico Dox, to interview him. On the 12th of July 2017, I started sending Typhus 1 question every day, and our conversation will continue until the 12th of July 2018. Typhus will respond with both texts and relevant images from his archive. This interview of 365 questions and answers will be released as a monograph publication of Dennis Typhus in the fall of 2018. 20/07/2017. Question 9. A few days ago, I found a very rare and Dadaist Royal Houseman's anthropological and archaeological research of traditional peasant houses on the island of Ibiza. Written between 1933 and 1936. Very interesting to see how one of the founders of Dada has spent a few years in retreat in Ibiza, investigating traditional architecture and related folklore elements such as dancing, singing, cooking, clothing, and so on. You have also often been working with architecture, perhaps not always in a very direct way, but for instance with your intervention together with Vaast, breaking through a brick wall and thereby connecting 2 different gallery spaces in Antwerp. This was the Stella Lohaus Gallery and Maase Matisse Gallery. I also think of the artist-run spaces, Günther and Stadslimiet, you have developed together with him in Antwerp. And soon, in your forthcoming exhibition in 1646, where you will construct and program a bar as part of your installation there, which later in 2018 will become part of your pavilion project at the Open Air Sculpture Park, Middelheim Museum Antwerp. How important is architecture in and to your work? What kind of architecture inspires you? You already mentioned Assemble. I am curious to know, who are your architect heroes?
Dennis Typhus. In essence, my interest in architecture grew out of the squatting movement scene in the 90s in Antwerp and Ghent. Around 96, when I was still living with my parents in a small suburban village called Hoevenen, I was very eager to leave and go live in Antwerp by myself and get together with like-minded souls. In the summer of 96, a huge abandoned school building in the Meerstraat was squatted and named Vogelvrijstad, Outlaw City. Although we only remained there for 2 months, the police shut it down violently. It had a very big impact on me personally and also on the future of various cultural scenes in Antwerp. People from very different backgrounds met each other there. Really, there were no alternative spaces in Antwerp where such forms of self-organization and do-it-yourself practices could take place. I mean, there was a group of punks usually hanging out at the Groenplaats, the main city square, some young and older artists, also political activists like Peter Terrein, Bart Peters and others. And there were people that set up gigs in youth clubs such as Lintfabrik in Kontig and Sorm in Deurne. There was a label called Conspiracy Records, and Radio Centraal used to report on everything that was happening there.
For the first time, all these people worked together to transform this old school building into a sort of autonomous and unique center for the art and music. Although I was there only once, it made a big impression on me. Not only this diverse group of people creating something together, but also the idea of reusing an architectural space that lay abandoned for many years. This idea of finding a new purpose for an abandoned building is something that later on became very important in my artistic practice. Immediately following this squatting episode, a lot of political action emerged in Antwerp, coming from that same group of people. The most memorable and funny was Spaak en Tandrat, a bicycle guerrilla group whose aim was to get rid of cars in the city center, something that has, by now, almost entirely been achieved, and introduce free public transport, something that is still far from happening. A few people that joined forces at Vogelvrijstad started squatting abandoned spaces by the riverside, close to the river Scheldt. My first studio was at the lower floor of a squat across from Hutsteen, a medieval fortress in the old city center. In the summer of '98, Scheldtapen opened, a wonderful event. Formerly a canteen for train drivers, it was surrounded by a huge garden and situated between some abandoned rails and the river. It was perfectly hidden from any other living areas, yet still within the city's inner ring. On the opening day, I painted a huge fresco on the wall of a space that shortly after became the concert venue of this squad. It was the biggest drawing I had ever made. I also started organizing concerts there, and not long after I moved into Philadelphia, and an all-girls squad on the other side of the river, near where the Museum Maas is now located. This squad had various artist studios and was filled to the brim with creative people. Maskers Machine had their studio there, as well 3, sometimes 4 or even 5 girls who came together to do performances, write songs, make clothes, produce a radio show and so on. It was a very nice time, though it got a little cold inside this building in winter. It definitely shaped my awareness of the reusage and transformation potential of existing structures and situations. Another thing I think of a lot is looking up. Though in a dense small city such as Antwerp and most other Belgian cities, you are bound to look ahead when walking or driving, though, through all those narrow streets. However, when looking up, a completely new world awaits you, rich with often abandoned architectural masterpieces. Much like my love of skateboarding, if I see an empty ruined building, I often think of all its future possibilities and all the things that you could do with these abandoned places, activating these architectures. A little over 10 years after the opening of Scheldtapen, Vaast and myself felt a need to share a space together, and so we came up with the idea of a shared studio where we could also organize public events, lectures, exhibitions and concerts. The strange nothing works here atmosphere of the mostly abandoned shopping center next to the Renaat Brahms Oudaan police tower seemed ideal for us. But, as with most found spaces, this empty building also had some negative elements. When the police finally found out what was happening there, and that it was not construction work but hard to locate alternative music and sound performances, the fun was quickly over, and so we had to leave and find another space. We started Stadslimiet in front of the small bus stop across the street from Hutsteen, basically next to where the artist Gordon Matta Clark made his infamous and sadly enough demolished office baroque work. Once again, it was a space without heating or hot water. Though very inspiring and in the summer pretty good for presenting work to small audiences. Somehow I am always looking out for new potential spaces to occupy, partly for pragmatic reasons and partly for the love of how they look and might look in the future. Another way in which architecture slipped into my practice is by working together with FVWW, a collective of young local architects who invited me to create an artwork for the facade of the Lessius University in Antwerp. It was a nice collaboration on many different levels. Aside from the commissioned artwork, they also asked me if I wanted to design the sportswear for their football team. Every year they take part in this Archie Gold Cup, a soccer contest, between various architectural studios. I agreed to do their shirts, and shortly if they changed their name to the UE 164, and henceforth their team became an Ultra Eczema release as well. Those football games turned into mayhem events, as UE 164 was the only team which supported hooligans.
23/07/2017, question 12. I will return to the notion of fiction later, in a future question, as I first want to go back to the notion of alternative spaces. I was involved in the squatting of Maasstraat in the mid-1990s, and I was also there at the end of the 2-month residency when the police arrived to violently remove the core group of squatters from the building. Being there, helping friends that were heavily attacked by the police, this event also strongly marked my practice as a person. I found a lot of inspiration in this very specific political, social and cultural act in the Maasstraat, and it gave me much food for thought in the years that followed, when I started to organize concerts and exhibitions, and also support conspiracy records by silkscreen printing record sleeves, and so on. I still remember helping out Joris de Buijser in the mid-1990s with the distribution of his Bonds of Friendship fanzines before he founded Conspiracy Records as a label in 1996. So, I would like to go back to this notion of self-organization in relation to movements of political, social, and cultural crisis and upheaval in a city like Antwerp. Of course, always strongly connected to events in other cities in Europe, the States, and Asia, as these punk, hardcore, and hip-hop scenes were in dialogue with one another on a global scale through mail art and fanzine mail. Most likely, there are still a lot of traces in your personal archives of magazines, books, records. Can you tell me more about the politics and poetics of the art and music scene in the mid to late 1990s in Antwerp? Where and when you grew up as a curious young artist? I feel that there are a lot of interesting stories there that can give a good insight in how you work today and how you will continue to work tomorrow.
DT. Actually, I still have a clear image of Joris de Buijser being pushed away by the police, shown on the 7 o'clock news when Vogelvrijstad got evicted and all its inhabitants gathered at the Groenplaats. As Antwerp is a small city, though crammed with loud mouths, artists and characters of all sorts like in any other city, there is somehow an inevitable blending among everyone who is interested in the countercultural, which was supported by the activities of Radio Centraal. Especially in those early pre-internet times of the 80s and 90s, it was a boiling pot of everything odd, artistic, musical and strange, also politically. Radio Centraal made it pretty clear from the beginning that it was a leftist radio station, airing shows by minorities as well as not giving any voice to extreme right parties. Most importantly, I think that mixing different generations as well as creating things together through alternative broadcasting was special. My teenage mind was definitely and utterly confused by the absurd talk shows RTVS, which included architect and ex-situationist Rudy Renson, whose studio at Ercola I took over much later. I hardly understood what they were talking about, but it was all so absurd and different from anything I had ever heard before that it made me very curious. In between the Vogelvrijstad and Scheltapen squats, which were only 2 years apart, a lot of events happened in this community. A new space opened at Paardenmarkt called Wijk, where every Friday evening they served food and drinks accompanied by a lecture, usually in an anarchist, communist activist type of atmosphere. A lot of protest groups were formed there too, including Spaak en Tandrad and Wordt Vervolgd, to be continued, persecuted. Both collectives were basically turning to the streets into some kind of playground. This is also where I met Benjamin Verdonk, who is probably the only artist I know from those movements who is still active today. I am breaking my head over where and when to start telling stories about this period, as so many things happened. Maybe these stories will just resurface when we talk more specifically about that time.
0108-2017, question 21. While visiting your archive yesterday afternoon, I noticed two very interesting things. Your collection of zines, records, and other printed matter mainly seems to be based on an economy of exchange, and not on this classical idea of buying and selling things. Can you say more about this notion of exchange that has not only inspired your archive, but also your attitude of working as an artist? And your archive also grows a network of friends, which is visualized in the ensemble of releases on your Ultra Examo label. Is that correct?
TT. Most of the time, though not always, it is true that a lot of publications, records and cassettes in my personal archives were traded with the artists and or publisher that made them. Trading and sharing works was probably one of the main reasons why I started putting out records and books, which is obviously much cheaper than buying all that printed matter. But at the same time, I do still spend a lot of money that I earn straight away on buying records. When you put out an archival record, at best you get the chance to dig very deep into an artist's personal collection of things, and which is probably the closest you can ever look into someone's work. This person allows you inside their personal surroundings. The same goes for trading, as this always happens out of a personal contact with another artist, and at best you become friends and the exchange continues for a lifetime, but often it just ends. I am not a collector who needs all and everything by a certain artist. My collection is not complete, but rather a pile of stuff that I came across while working as an artist. I will hardly ever throw anything away, as most of this stuff I received as presents from or trades with someone else. So it is connected to a moment in time or a specific friend. Of course, there is definitely a lot of stuff in my apartment and studio that I am wondering about where it all came from and what kind of relation I have with it. I feel that lots of the trading comes out of mutual interests, various excitements, and especially curiosity. And there is still no better way to start a day than with a full mailbox. This morning, a package of books by the Austrian artist Thomas Geiger, as well as a package of Sophie Herner filled with records by her bands Neutral and Enhet for Free Music, arrived, making it a great morning for me. Most of my communication with others, be it through handwritten letters, email, phone calls, and especially meetings in real time, generate new interests, contacts, and collaborations. Somehow, the word network got stained and polluted by careerism in very dull ways. At best, a network is a small community of enthusiasts spread all over the planet, sometimes eliminating the differences between audience and maker.
0308, question 23b. I want to expand on your reflections about the notion of network, as I also believe, as you already answered to a previous question of mine, that this word got seriously infected by careerism. Networking has much more to do with self-organization, compassionate economy, friendship, and the idea of commons, and is something we learned through our experiences in the do-it-yourself attitude of the late 1980s and early 90s, when we were skateboarding in the streets, squatting abandoned buildings, and organizing concerts and exhibitions there.
DT. It goes back to just hanging out by yourself on the playground at school, or when being on holidays with your parents as a teenager and seeing that other boy or girl with a t-shirt of the Germs sending a message of "please come to talk to me, I hate everyone else." I guess searching for a common ground and social contact. That incredible feeling of coming home. I was never a good skater, though it was an excuse not to be home. A very good reason to be outside and discover a lot of words that were not used at home. It is funny that we talk about squatting so much, as today it has somehow totally disappeared in Antwerp. This idea of a group of different people coming together who were not even necessarily good friends, but did have a common goal like squatting a huge empty building and not being dependent on anything or anyone to organize something. In some way, the general gentrification of this squatting movement made the younger folks extremely lazy. Nowadays, most of the young generation expects it all to happen for them. As a matter of course, like while growing up, for example, the city provided 2 or 3 gigantic skate parks, so there is no reason at all for this young generation to do anything themselves.
08/09/2017, question 59. It would be nice to talk more about the how and what of developing your own economy, not only financially, but the notion of economy on many, if not all levels. Can you give me some insight into your personal economy of doing things? And what would you tell the younger generation when they ask you about where and when to start their work? How to build their own economy? Any inspiring suggestions? I strongly believe it is always important to give one another confidence and trust.
DT. I do not think that I ever developed an economy that was entirely my own. I always traded things with others, whether for food, drinks, records, books, as these are the few things that I really need, or would be sad not to have. For example, there have been times in my life that someone working in a restaurant liked my work, and so I could go and eat there on a daily basis in exchange for some records and posters. And a few years ago, restaurant De Niets purchased a work of mine for which they paid me with meals. Actually, I ate their great vol au vent every week for about 8 months. At some point, I also had a running tap at Café Witzli Putzli in trade for records and books. Recently, I tattooed a friend who will cook for me in trade for these tattoos. Graphic designer Janus Prutpus-Lemaire silkscreen record sleeves for Ultra Eczema in trade for a tattoo. And every time Gerard Herman prints something for me at the school where he works, I also tattoo his leg. Or do something with his third nipple, which I consider mine now. In one way or another, I squatted his nipple. I strongly doubt if many people would ask me for some economical tips, though I could share with them what I do believe. It really starts by organizing things yourself and not mirroring yourself to the success of famous artists, which is as rare as a terrorist attack. Many of the artists that I know have other jobs besides their artistic practice. I never did that, but I definitely suffered financially at various moments in life. I consider this a personal choice, and I also know in advance that there will be most likely, now and then, and for the rest of my days, times when it will be hard for me to survive. But also other moments when everything will run smoothly. And I try very hard not to spend one single day doing things that I do not want to do, which I believe is quite economical. I have listened to Henning Christiansen's Fluxit music essayistic LP on Borgen Records.
26/01/2018, question 199. I'd like to get back to you to unravel together the word punk, as I feel we have been partly inspired and formed by this historical movement through its visual, musical and activist languages. But more importantly, I think by the energy of doing it yourself. It helped me in having the confidence in developing self-supporting structures within my practice as an artist, but also as a citizen in my daily life. It would be nice to talk more with you about your personal philosophies and small revolutions.
DT. I do not really know where to start this unraveling. The do-it-yourself spirit is of course much older than the punk movement, and I was not even born when punk started to happen. According to my personal feeling, it is a very organic process of self-organizing things that has been passed on generation after generation through different forms of countercultural scenes. I am still reading that book about Kras right now. Until so far, a very nice and interesting experience. I like reading about how people from what seems like total different environments had a link with each other. For example, free jazz percussionist Terry Day is showing up in this book pretty early on. Lots of Crass's ideas seem very interesting to me, though often I would not be able to take part in these things. The idea of an open house, for example, which was intended to be developed all over the UK and Scotland, and even further expanding to the rest of the world. Artists, music bands, and so on could go from house to house and always have a place to stay. They could stay there in trade for a poem if you were a poet, or a song if you were a musician, or a meal if you were a cook. In theory, this all sounds wonderful, but I think my past experiences of living together in squats and shared houses have proved to me that I live best just by myself. Nevertheless, these kind of open places are interesting and challenging to participate in as an organizer of events. Scheltape was a good example of that. Early to bed today, long drive tomorrow. Listen to various Brain Bombs records.
0702-2018, question 212. Bologna had historically always been a city to publicly carry out strong leftist politics. Today, I think it has drastically changed because everything in Italy, the right-wing party, has become very powerful, as everywhere else in Europe and many parts of the world. Bologna was for decades and decades, especially in the 1960s and 70s, a breeding ground for many anarchist movements, radical filmmakers, poets, student movements, and so on. Today I feel we have to leave this dialectic notion of left and right politics and create new models of politics. What would your answer be, as an artist and world citizen, towards our contemporary politics?
DT. I strongly believe that the way in which interesting artists organize themselves is a political statement as such. I am allergic to obvious political art as well as uninspiring protests. Of course, I am nevertheless for a resistance that is performative, that does not endlessly repeat the same old slogans. I think artists can play a role in all of this. For example, by setting up happenings, speakers' corners, producing public posters or doing interventions, and writing and barking poems that are smarter than dumb Trump. My personal answer to contemporary politics is partly to neglect politics, as I feel that giving more attention to the enemy is serving them well these days, especially through all the social media. I do understand that people are baffled and repost articles on right-wing scum. True, personally, I do not want to share this verbal, visual and written diarrhea. This might sound pretty naive, but I do believe in creating a positive social space apart from it. To all who are interested, to say it with a Club Morale LP title, I am also for strikes, pranking the enemy, food not bombs, peace, a different protest today, a lot more public transportation, legal drugs, free beer for the punks, rage against the machine, painting Chernobyl was no accident on the back of your leather jacket, squatting, sticking playing cards in your bicycle wheels, painting the dark brown hall white, equal pay, open kitchen with free meals made from the mountains of daily leftovers of supermarkets, homeless shelters, spaces for clean needle exchange, free condoms, art and poetry instead of commercials on billboards. All commercials should only get printed on toilet paper. Police uniforms designed by Leigh Bowery, street names made up by poets, writers or artists, etc. I have been listening to the first LPs by Yellow.
Notes. Ercola are an Antwerp artists collective, founded in 1968. They published the art journal Spruit and later designed sets for TV and theatre. Since the early 1970s, Ercola operated from a former hospice at Wolstraat 31. Neutral are an experimental music duo from Sweden. Enhet för fri musik are an experimental improvisation collective from Sweden. Crass were an English art collective and punk rock band formed in 1977 who promoted anarchism as a political ideology, a way of life, and a resistance movement. Club Moraal was the name of the artistic duo Annemie van Kerkhoven and Danny de Vos, who made industrial music. It was also the name of a concert and exhibition venue that they ran in Burgerhout in the 1980s. Yellow is a Swiss electronic duo band formed in the late 1970s, consisting of Dieter Meijer and Boris Blank.
The archive as a tool for artistic research, an artistic contribution. Tomas Beaujean, Idris Sevenans. Forwarded message from Idris Sevenans, docent, idris.sevenans@antwerpartistrunSchool.com, 16 November 2020, to Nico Docs. Geachte collega Docs, bedankt voor de goede zorgen en opvolging. Zeer benieuwd naar de publicatie. Met Tomas Beaujean werkte ik aan een tekst en een selectie afbeeldingen voor de reader die jullie aan het maken zijn. In deze link https://we.t/t-n2cp4qr21w vind je alle afbeeldingen met bijhorende tekst. Index beeldmateriaal.docs en onze tekst met als bestaansnaam Nico.docs. Laat maar weten moesten er nog gewenste aanpassingen nodig zijn. Met vriendelijke groet, Idris Sevenans, docent, Aars, Antwerp Artist Run School.
The value of squatting an asshole, another exchange value. Tomas Beaujean in conversation with Idris Sevenans. In the studio we are now looking at a photograph of a book in which we see, self-referring in times of research, flyer announcing Idris Sevenans' solo show, I started painting when I was 64, I'm 25 now, at Haken en Ogen, printed in Nico Docs Talks with Dennis Typhus, published in 2019, photo taken by Idris Sevenans. In the studio we are now looking at a painting called Aars Logo, created by Flexboy in LA in 2019. The photo was taken by Idris Sevenans. In much, if not all printed matter that the artist Sevenans produces with his own collective Troebel Nijntje, he invited, engages and collaborates with other artists, writers and musicians. His work is about many different things, and one can perhaps even say that TN is a production platform rather than just a regular artist collective. It is also a communication tool that enriches and enlarges his personal network of friends and collaborations. His artist books speak for themselves, as they are simply things he really wants to publish, sometimes in conjunction with events, performances or exhibitions, and sometimes just out of the necessity to share his work with friends. The great diversity of publications that he releases on TN are mostly the product of collaborations in which the content is created by musicians, artists or performers he invites for a project. As part of his practice, Sevenans often designs and makes the artwork for these publications' covers. In most cases, he tries to mix and collage historical documents with the results of his own artistic practice. The personal relationship he has with other artists is the most important aspect in realizing all these collaborations. A lot of content in the books that TN releases is from Antwerp. It totally makes sense, as a protest against forgetting, to document and record what is happening or what has happened in this small harbour city. Antwerp is known for its experimental music, fashion and art, but there is still so much more to discover. Sevenans wants to support, release and communicate both his own practice as well as other people's practices. And all of this happens because there is an immediate and mutual understanding of each other's work. It is all based on notions of friendship and commoning. Then again, collectivity brings its own difficulties. Sometimes Sevenans has the feeling that collectivity is not feeding his energy, but rather stopping it from taking place. He always has very clear ideas about the how and what of making a book, an installation, a film, a performance, an architectural object. This makes him a difficult, although very interesting and challenging character within any sort of group dynamic. A while ago, as part of our 1-year-long interview, Sevenans told me how he visited an exhibition. He told me he was blown away by the work and the ideas, as well as their collective working attitude. And to quote Sevenans, this positive power of many hands joined together. Even though in many cases, past experiences have indicated that collectivity is not where Sevenans functions at his best. There are a number of artists he has been working with for many years now, and these collaborations are based on mutual understanding, humor, and especially a love of art. For example, the artist Tomas Beaujean, with whom he created many duo exhibitions, ran an alternative space, TN, and founded an art school, ARS, Antwerp Artist Run School, for presenting and conjuring a huge diversity of contemporary art forms. At this very moment, Sevenans runs a bar space, sometimes in collaboration with graphic designer Robbie Blondbaard. On the occasion of the I Started Painting When I Was 64, I'm 25 Now exhibition at Larsen Bervoets project space Haken en Ogen in Antwerp, Sevenans invited Tomas Beaujean to squat his own finissage. They created their first arts course, How to Open an Art Gallery, and started to talk. This conversation is an excerpt of 365 questions and answers that will be released as a monograph publication. 15/04/2018, Question 9. A few days ago, I found a very rare booklet of Marcel van Malen. De veroordeling van Marcel van Malen door Marcel van Malen, gevolgd door een verrassende vrijspraak. The conviction of Marcel van Malen by Marcel van Malen, followed by a surprising acquittal. Very interesting to see how Marcel approached self-critique in his one-act play. On the right side of the pages in this booklet, we find the play itself. On the left side, there are critical remarks on his person, originating from newspaper clippings and reviews, lifted from his own archive. You reissued this work with TN in 2019. What inspired you to revive such an obscure and small booklet?
When I tried to pry Marcel van Malen's old friend and collaborator Tone Pauwels for anecdotes and information on Marcel, I received the answer: Ik weet niet wat er gebeurd is in de jaren 60, want ik was erbij. I don't remember anything from the 60s because I was there. Thus, I was forced to follow the trail of breadcrumbs left by Marcel in his own archive. I was given access to the Marcel van Malen archive and received accompanying context from his widow Karin Lampens. Archives can sometimes feel like a desert. There is always the fear you are chasing a fata morgana when walking in them for too long. You can never be sure whether what you see is true, especially not when it is based on second-hand information. Isn't all archived information second-hand information? Perhaps all we are doing is connecting the right documents, artifacts with events to reconstruct the story the archivist was trying to tell. Several archival objects piqued my interest in the context of my own archival practice. There was the booklet De veroordeling van Marcel van Malen, door Marcel van Malen, gevolgd door een verrassende vrijspraak, mentioned in your question, in which he recontextualized archival objects from his own archive as a way of self-reflection, self-critique, and raw material for his creative process. It feels like a creative balancing act between the past, present, and future. Another archival object of great interest was the computer, created by Tone Pauwels. This was not a PC or Macintosh computer, but an instrument that helped the visually impaired Van Malen in his writing process. The computer is from a time where computers were not everyday household objects, but alien artifacts of an abstract future. In essence, it is a wooden box with compartments identified by nails, wherein audio tapes were placed with Van Male's dictations. These were supplemented with handwritten dictate notes made by his wife. It required 4 hands to operate, the feeling fingers of Marcel and the guiding hands of his wife Corinne. While still in operation, it was an active, ever-evolving archive of an ongoing creative process. Archivist and performer Hans Thijs helped me to connect my own practice to Marcel Van Male's archive, in order to reactivate it. What can Marcel mean for my practice today? What role can he have in ARS, Antwerp Artist Run School, TN, or even HOR, het ongewenste reclamebureau, the unwanted advertising agency? I grappled with these questions in my book, The Computer, which was the result of my research project at the Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp. My research presentation was disguised as an archery competition, handboogschutterswedstrijd, between 2 teams consisting of old and new friends of Marcel Van Male. Team Fred Bervoets, Marcel Van Male, Tone Pauwels, Karin Lampens, Frank Mailleu, Marcel Brotaars, Walter Svenne, Adriaan Raamdonk, Guy Rombouts, Hans Thijs, Dennis Typhus, Vaas Colson en Johan Pas. Team Werner de Vos, Nicolas Bal, Jolijn Bakeland, Nienke Bakeland, Zena van den Blok, Idris Sevenans, Tomas Beaujean, Robbie Blonbaert, Karel Haze, Larsen Bervoets, Vincent van Mene, Flexboy NLA en Els de Bruin. This archery competition was alternatively announced as an exhibition called Nee, ik speel niet mee. No, I'm not playing along. This name was lifted from a documentary about Marcel Van Male by Mark Gens and Rudy Willocks, released in 2007.
In the studio, we are now looking at a photograph of Johan Pas at archery competition Handboogschutterswedstrijd, honoring Marcel Van Male. This photo was taken in 2019 by Idris Sevenans. And now we look at another photograph of The Computer, by Tone Pauwels, made for Marcel Van Male. The photo was taken by Idris Sevenans. 1804-2018, question 12. I will return to the notion of fiction later, in a future question, as I first want to go back to the notion of alternative spaces. You presented the reissue of Marcel Van Male's booklet, De veroordeling van Marcel Van Male, door Marcel Van Male, gevolgd door een verrassende vrijspraak, at Café de Ville, Bar Traffic. This name obviously refers to the idea of Van Male to open a bar named Traffic, so he could say, I'm not home yet, I'm stuck in traffic. The booklet presentation was accompanied by an exhibition of items you selected from the Marcel Van Male archive and a performance by Hans Thijs. This was the first of a series of bars you opened at the same location, each having a different name and theme. Some that come to mind are Café de Triptyque, Bar Triptych, Café de Parking, Bar de Parking Lot, Café de Vaste Hand, Bar de Steady Hand, Café de Spons, Bar de Sponge, and Café de Friet, Bar de French Fry. What inspired you to open and close a series of bars?
Between 14 and 18, I organized exhibitions and events under the banner of TN in an old DIY shop at Paardenmarkt, Antwerp. I remember Johan Pas walking in the TN space, going straight to the bar and declaring, "Dat is hier precies geen galerij, maar een café." This doesn't seem to be an exhibition space, but a bar. This inspired me to start organizing happenings as fictive bars. Everybody knows small exhibition spaces are alternative bars in new clothing. By chance, I was renovating an old bar space in the city center of Antwerp at that time. Johan's timely intervention proved to be a huge inspirational and formative force.
In the studio, we now have a photograph in front of us of Café de Ville, taken in 2019 by Idris Sevenans. And now we are looking at another photograph of the performance of Hans Thijs at opening of Café de Ville in 2019, photo from Zena van den Blok. 27/04/2018, question 21. I was involved in the squatting of the University of Thessaloniki in 2003, and was also there at the end of the month-long residency when the Greek military removed the last army of occupiers with overwhelming might. Being there, helping friends that were heavily attacked by a foreign military force, this event also strongly marked my practice as a person. I found a lot of inspiration in this very specific political, social and cultural act in Thessaloniki, and it gave me much food for thought in the years that followed, when I was taking part in laying the foundation of the Cultural Youth Center Kafka at Oudaan in Antwerp, across Renaat Braam's dystopian police tower. The building in which Kafka is located was my old elementary school. I saw the repurposing of this abandoned former school building as an essential, personal and political act to transcend trauma from my personal and our collective history.
When I see academic carcasses, I see nothing but potential, all the things you could do with these abandoned houses of knowledge. In essence, both my artistic and political interest in architecture started last year, when Tomas Beaujean and I gradually replaced AP flags with Aars flags at Campus de Singel, one flag at a time, until we had reshaped it into an Aars campus. We also squatted a school in a Dutch town called Aardenburg. Campus Aarsenburg was founded during a summer arts festival, curated by Hans Thijs. The squatting of the sculpture department of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts by sleeping there during the Christmas holidays of 2018 is another example of such trans-academic experiment. To quote Tone Pauwels, "If there is a sink in an empty space, you can live in it." There was a sink in the atelier, but it didn't have heating or hot water. Very inspiring and fitted perfectly in the philosophy that everything was already done in the 60s. This squatting action was directly inspired by a fictitious solitary protest march against the Provo movement, which Marcel van Malen organized in 1966. The program was printed in Dale 5, a literary magazine. To follow this tradition, I am currently working on a bronze sculpture of Campus Mutsaert at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, slowly filling the building with bronze to remove its shell afterwards.
29/04/2018, question 23b. Our first arts course, How to Open an Art Gallery, was conceived as a squatting of the finissage of your own show. I started painting when I was 64, I'm 25 now, at Haken en Ogen. In the same month, we took over the book release event for Ontroerend Goed, written by Manuela Klerks and Oscar van Gelderen at De Groene Waterman in Antwerp. Their book was aimed at budding art collectors. We transposed this event into our course release event for How to Build an Art Collection, and sold more copies than Ontroerend Goed. I feel there are a lot of interesting stories there that can give a good insight in how you work today and how you will continue to work tomorrow.
The way in which we gradually annexed the Royal Academy of Fine Arts Antwerp by systematically appropriating their staff is a blueprint for my archival practice. Historical documents allow me to rediscover the present and reinvent the past, weaving a new web from old rags. In the presentation of Stoppen met lezen, thank you for reading, I used an excerpt of the Marcel Brotaars film Berlin oder ein Traum mit Sahne, Berlin or a Dream with Cream, to explain how that this was the first exercise to help people to stop reading. Marcel van Malen developed several methodological ways to help people stop reading. The most famous are his gebottelde gedichten, bottled poems, where he bottled up his handouts of poems. I recuperated this historical material and put it in a new contemporary context.
In the studio, we now are looking at the anti-Provo planning printed in Dale 5 by Marcel van Malen, 1966. This document was scanned by Idris Sevenans. Next we look at a photograph of the squatted University of Thessaloniki in 2003, photo taken by Tomas Beaujean. Next we look at a video still of how to run an art school from 2019, video by Hans Thijs. Then we look at a photograph of Campus Aarsenburg from Kunstenfestival Aardenburg by Hans Thijs, 2019, photo taken by Idris Sevenans. And now we look at a photograph of the Aars Campus De Singel from 2019, photo taken by Tomas Beaujean. Another photograph called Kakademie by Occupy Antwerp, 2011, photo by Idris Sevenans. And another photograph, Aars Book Fair banner on Campus Mutsaert of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts Antwerp by Carl Hayes, 2019, photo by Idris Sevenans. 04/06/2018, question 59. While visiting your archive yesterday afternoon, I noticed two very interesting things. Your collection of zines, books and art pieces mainly seems to be based on an economy of exchange, and not on this classical idea of buying and selling things. Can you say more about this notion of exchange that has not only inspired your archive, but also your gratitude of working as an artist? And your archive also grows a network of friends, which is visualized in the ensemble of releases with Tien and Aars. Is that correct?
Most of the time, though not always, it is true that a lot of the publications and art pieces in my personal archive were traded with the artist and or publishers that made them. Trading and sharing works was probably one of the main reasons why I started putting out publications, which is obviously much cheaper than buying all that printed matter. But at the same time, I do still spend a lot of money that I earn straight away on buying publications and other forms of art. This reminds me of Van Male's self-recorded tape archive. When he was blind, he used these audio tapes as a medium to share his writings with other artists as mail art. As mentioned in one of our previous conversations, the computer was an active, ever-evolving archive of an ongoing creative process that consisted of audio tapes. He also used it as a telephone to call his wife Kirin while she was on leave, as you can hear on the Ultra Eczema UE102 LP I Hate Music. Marcel Van Male. When you put out an archival record, at best you get the chance to dig very deep into an artist's personal collection of things, which is probably the closest you can ever look into someone's work. This person allows you inside their personal surroundings. The same goes for trading, as this always happens out of a personal contact with another artist. And at best you become friends, and the exchange continues for a lifetime, but often just ends. I am not a collector who needs all and everything by a certain artist. My collection is not complete, but rather a pile of stuff that I came across while working as an artist. I will hardly ever throw anything away, as most of this stuff I received are presents from or trades with someone. So it is connected to a moment in time or a specific friend. Of course, there is definitely a lot of stuff in my apartment and studio that I am wondering where it all came from and what kind of relation I have with it. I feel that a lot of trades come out of mutual interests, various excitements and especially curiosity. And there is no better way to start the day than with a full mailbox. This morning, a book by Jan Juffermans, Kunstonderwijs oplossen schroeven, Erode the Foundation of Art Education, arrived. I bought it out of a professional curiosity, but most of all it is an art piece of Wim T. Schippers in it. Most of my communication with others, be it through handwritten letters, emails, phone calls and especially meetings in real life, generate new interests, contacts and collaborations. Somehow the word network got stained and polluted by careerism in very dull ways. At best, a network is a small community of enthusiasts spread all over the planet, sometimes eliminating the differences between audience and maker. To quote Marcel van Malen, de maker is de norm, the maker is the norm.
08, 06, 2018, question 63. It would be nice to talk more about the how and what of developing your own economy, not only financially, but the notion of economy on many, if not all levels. Can you give me some insights into your personal economy of doing things? And what would you tell the younger generation when they ask you about where and when to start their work? How to build their own economy? Any inspiring suggestions? I strongly believe it is always important to give one another confidence and trust.
Renovating old buildings is a family tradition of mine. I founded Ars Construct to remain as independent and cost-effective as possible in the renovation of the old school buildings we acquired with Ars. Building costs are reduced by this corporate DIY strategy, a radical new professionalization in the academic world. Within Ars Construct, we also develop products, or multiples, as Marcel van Malen would call them. For example, a package of 21.25mm washers made out of 5 euro cents coins as a consumable construction tool. This was presented at the show Hoor Commerce at Gallery Ronnie van de Velde, curated by Hans Thijs. These multiples and products are an important source of income for our school. To quote Tomas Beaujean, "My real passion is teaching, but I create art on the side to pay the bills."
In the studio, we are now looking at a photograph of the Ars Construct washers 21.25mm by Christo and Sevenans from 2019. The photo was taken by Idris Sevenans. Now we are looking at a photograph of the quote from Tomas Beaujean above entrance campus Mozart of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts Antwerp, Beaujean T and Sevenans I, 2018-2019, typesetting Larsen Bervoets, photo Idris Sevenans. Next, we look at a photo Leraar worden net als Idris, become a teacher just like Idris. An AP advertisement from 2019, photo taken by Tomas Beaujean.
Archivers, Thomas Crombé en Idris Sevenans. Ars, Antwerp Artist Run School, Groot Pieterpotstraat 6, 2000 Antwerpen, ondernemingsnummer 0507 988703, BE 77 1030 38 14 75 42, factuur 1 2021, datum 5 januari 2021, vervaldatum 5 februari 2021, ondernemingsnummer BE 0535 880359, referentie Artesisch Plantijn Hogeschool ten aanzien van dienst boekhouding, Lange Nieuwstraat 101 2000 Antwerpen. Omschrijving: bijdrage publicatie Archivolt 0%, 28 oktober 2020, 30 november 2020. Bestelbonnummer B 2020 97 26 93 600. Totaalprijs €605, inclusief BTW €605. Kleine onderneming niet onderworpen aan BTW.
Forwarded message from Crombé Thomas, thomas.crombé@ap.be. Date 17/12/2020. Hoi Idris. Nico en ik hebben de voorbije dagen je ingestuurde materiaal bestudeerd. We hebben er toch enkele vragen bij. Ten eerste, je kiest voor een interviewformat, maar elders in het boek komt ook al een interview met jou, namelijk het interview dat ik afnam. Dat zal nogal vreemd overkomen. De lezer zal zich afvragen wat er verkeerd was met het eerste interview dat je nog een tweede nodig had. Ten tweede, de bijdrage in zijn geheel is opgevat als een parodie op het boek van Denis Stiefus en Nico Dox. Maar wat is het punt juist? Zijn dit zulke belangrijke iconen / vaderfiguren in de hedendaagse kunst dat het interessant is om ze van hun sokkel te halen? Ik denk eerlijk gezegd van niet. Slechts een heel kleine minderheid van de lezers zal de mop snappen. Dat vind ik jammer. Je moppen zijn normaal gezien beter geslaagd. Ten derde. Ten slotte vind ik het zelf jammer dat er niets met de resultaten van Aars / Marcel van Malen / My Real Passion is Teaching gebeurt in de pagina's van het boek. Je hebt daar zoveel materiaal liggen dat interessant zou kunnen zijn, dat dit voorstel nogal plattekjes is. Vele groeten, Thomas. AP Hogeschool, Antwerpen.
Forwarded message from Idris Sevenans, docent idris.sevenans@antwerpartistrunSchool.com, date 17 December 2020. Dag Thomas en Nico. Het ging Thomas en mij over het format van de conversatie die we hebben overgenomen. Het is uit een appreciatie dat we hebben geapproprieerd. Het is dus eerder een conversatie dan een interview. Er zitten veel elementen verweven uit wat er gebeurd is met Aars en Marcel van Malen, op een, denk ik, grappige manier. Thomas en ik hebben alles proberen in een nieuw jasje te steken. Ook een parodie op de zelfreferentie. Heel deze tekst is een drukke verkeersas die alle richtingen uitgaat, maar waar historische feiten kloppen. Ook de vele bijhorende beelden spreken mee en dragen zeker bij aan wat er rond Marcel van Malen is gebeurd. Bijvoorbeeld Café de Fille, wat ook in de conversatie wordt uitgeklaard. Hebben jullie een voorstel? Want ik begrijp de vraag niet zo goed. Met vriendelijke groet, Idris Sevenans, docent, Aars, Antwerp Artist Run School.
Forwarded message from Crombe Thomas, thomas.crombe@ap.be, date 17/12/2020. Het lijkt me gewoon jammer dat er nogal veel overlap is met het andere interview eerder in het boek. Ik vind de eerste bladzijde van je bijdrage ook tenenkronende zelfpromotie. Misschien moeten we kiezen voor één van beide interviews. Nu is het dubbelop. AP Hogeschool, Antwerpen.
Forwarded message from Idris Sevenans, docent idris.sevenans@antwerpartistrunSchool.com, date 17 December 2020. To Crombe Thomas, thomas.crombe@ap.be, cc nicodocs@yahoo.com. Ja, dat komt rechtstreeks uit de gesprekken tussen Nicodocs en Dennis Tyfus. Enkel heeft alles een herbestemming gekregen. Ik denk dat we best niets publiceren. Idris Sevenans, docent, Aars, Antwerp Artist Run School.
In the studio we are looking at a photograph of Idris Sevenans scanning the side of the book released by Archivold. And now we are looking at the result of that scan.
3 april 2021. Krelan, historiek, rekening. Detail transactie. Krelan. BE 77 1030 38 14 75 42. Zichtrekening. Bedrag. Plus €605. Uitgevoerd op 3 februari 2021. Valutadatum 3 februari 2021. Tegenpartij AP Hogeschool AV. BE 74 0013 59 32 96 07. Lange Nieuwstraat 101 2000 Antwerpen. Omschrijving 01 2021. Boekingsreferte C1B 03 XM0 110 08 726. Typeverrichting overschrijving in uw voordeel.